The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of the Wehrmacht testing facility at Kummersdorf, south of Berlin, on a cold February day in 1944. Major Ernst Volkmann of the German Army Weapons Office stood at a wooden bench, methodically working the action of an American rifle that had arrived 3 days earlier from the Eastern Front. The weapon had been recovered from a battlefield near Anzio, pulled from the frozen hands of a dead ranger, still loaded with 4 rounds remaining in its internal magazine. Volkmann had spent the morning reading the accompanying field report, a terse document written by an Oberst commanding a Panzergrenadier regiment, who had described American infantry fire as continuous and overwhelming. Now, holding the M1 Garand in his hands, feeling the weight of its gas-operated mechanism, Volkmann was beginning to understand why his frontline commanders were filing increasingly urgent reports about the firepower disparity their soldiers faced. He pressed down on the clip latch with his thumb. The en-bloc clip, still holding those 4 cartridges, ejected upward with a distinctive metallic ping, landing on the bench beside a growing collection of similar clips. Volkmann picked up a full clip, 8 rounds of 30-06 ammunition held together by spring steel, and positioned it over the rifle's open action. One firm press downward, and the entire clip dropped into the rifle's internal magazine. The bolt released automatically, chambering the first round, from empty to loaded in less than 2 seconds. He had timed it. By comparison, the Kar98k's, the Kar98k, the standard rifle carried by every German infantryman since 1935, required individual insertion of 5 rounds from a stripper clip, a process taking anywhere from 4 to 6 seconds, even for a well-trained soldier under ideal conditions. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The mathematics were simple, Volkmann thought, but the tactical implications were profound. 8 rounds versus 5. A semi-automatic action versus a bolt-action mechanism. An American rifleman could deliver aimed fire at a rate approaching 40 to 50 rounds per minute if he maintained discipline and changed clips efficiently. A German rifleman, working his bolt action with practiced speed, might achieve 15 to 20 rounds per minute at best. In sustained combat, particularly in the close-range firefights that characterized the Italian campaign and the fighting in the Normandy hedgerows, this disparity translated into a 2-to-1 or even 3-to-1 advantage in firepower for American infantry squads. And this calculation didn't even account for the greater reliability of the semi-automatic action under field conditions, no frozen bolt to struggle with, no manual cycling that could be interrupted by incoming fire or the chaos of close combat. Volkmann set the rifle down and walked to the window, looking out across the testing range where, in better times, the Wehrmacht had evaluated prototype weapons that promised German technological superiority. The Mauser Company, which manufactured the Kar98k at its massive facility in Oberndorf, had built a rifle that embodied Germanic engineering principles, robust, accurate, simple enough for conscript armies to maintain, based on a bolt-action design that Paul Mauser had perfected in the 1890s. It was, by any measure, an excellent rifle. German infantrymen had carried variations of this weapon through 2 world wars, and in terms of accuracy and reliability, it remained competitive with any bolt-action rifle in the world. But the Americans hadn't tried to build a better bolt-action rifle. They had changed the fundamental premise of infantry weapons design. The M1 Garand, adopted by the United States Army in 1936, represented the first semi-automatic rifle to be issued as standard equipment to an entire national army. Its designer, John Garand, a Canadian-born engineer working at the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts, had solved the complex engineering problems that had defeated numerous other attempts to create a reliable self-loading rifle. The gas-operated action, which bled off a small portion of propellant gases from the fired cartridge to cycle the bolt automatically, had to function reliably across a wide range of temperatures and battlefield conditions. It had to withstand the mud of Italian winter, the dust of North African desert, the humidity of Pacific islands, the cold of the Ardennes forest. The Garand did all of this, Volkmann had to admit, with remarkable consistency. German weapons designers had not been blind to the potential advantages of semi-automatic rifles. The Gewehr 43, or G43, had been developed in 1943, in direct response to the superior firepower that German troops faced from Soviet Tokarev semi-automatic rifles on the Eastern Front. The G43 was, by most technical standards, an excellent weapon, accurate, reliable when properly maintained, and capable of delivering semi-automatic fire using the same 7.92mm ammunition as the Kar98k. But it had arrived too late and in too small numbers to significantly affect the infantry firepower equation. By February 1944, when Volkmann stood in the Kummersdorf testing facility examining the captured Garand, German industry had produced perhaps 100,000 G43 rifles. By contrast, American industry had already manufactured more than 3 million M1 Garands, and production continued at a rate exceeding 100,000 units per month across multiple factories. Volkmann returned to the bench and picked up the after-action report again. The Oberst, who had written it, commanded a regiment that had been engaged in defensive operations against American forces near the Rapido River in Italy. His description was clinical but revealing: enemy infantry attacks are preceded by intense automatic weapons fire from rifle squads. Our men report that American riflemen maintain continuous fire during their advance, forcing our soldiers to remain in covered positions. When our men attempt to return fire, they are immediately suppressed by the volume of incoming rounds. The tactical advantage this provides to the attacker cannot be overstated. The report went on to note that captured American soldiers, when questioned, expressed surprise that German infantry still carried bolt-action rifles. One prisoner, a private from Texas, had apparently told his interrogators that he had assumed the Germans would have something modern, like our Garand. This assumption that technological modernity was an American birthright rather than a German one would have seemed absurd to Volkmann just a few years earlier. Germany had entered the Second World War with what many military analysts considered the most technically advanced armed forces in the world. The panzer divisions, the Luftwaffe's fighter aircraft, the coordination of armor and tactical air power that characterized blitzkrieg operations, these had represented genuine innovations in military technology and doctrine. But somewhere between the invasion of Poland in 1939 and the winter of 1943–44, the technological balance had shifted. American industrial capacity, once fully mobilized for war production, had begun to produce not just greater quantities of equipment, but, in certain crucial categories, superior designs implemented on a scale that German industry could not match. The M1 Garand exemplified this shift. It wasn't necessarily a better rifle than the Kar98k in every measurable category. The Mauser's bolt-action design was inherently more accurate for precision shooting at longer ranges. The Kar98k was lighter, simpler to field strip and clean, less dependent on high-quality ammunition for reliable function. But these advantages, real as they were, mattered less in the kind of warfare that dominated most infantry combat, close-range firefights at distances under 200 meters, where volume of fire and the ability to keep an enemy's head down while your squad maneuvered decided the outcome. In these conditions, the Garand's 8-round capacity and semi-automatic action provided a decisive tactical edge. Volkmann had read the technical specifications carefully. The M1 Garand weighed 9.5 pounds loaded, compared to the Kar98k's roughly 9 pounds with a full 5-round magazine. Not a significant difference. Both rifles fired full-power rifle cartridges, the Garand chambered for 30-06 Springfield, the Kar98k for 7.9, 2x57mm Mauser. Both cartridges delivered similar ballistic performance, with effective ranges well beyond what infantry combat typically required. But the Garand's en-bloc clip system allowed a soldier to carry his ammunition in ready-to-load 8-round clips, each one a sealed unit that could be inserted into the rifle in a single motion. The Kar98k's stripper clips, by contrast, required the soldier to open the bolt, position the stripper clip over the internal magazine, and manually press down on the rounds to strip them from the clip into the magazine, a process that required both hands and at least a few seconds of concentration, time during which the soldier could not be firing or taking cover. The testing officer assigned to assist Volkmann, a Hauptmann named Dieter Schultz, entered the room carrying a wooden crate containing additional captured American equipment. Schultz had spent the previous week conducting firing tests with both the M1 Garand and several examples of the G43, comparing their performance under simulated combat conditions. His report, which Volkmann had reviewed that morning, contained detailed firing rate data, accuracy measurements at various ranges, and reliability testing under adverse conditions, exposure to mud, sand, extreme cold, and the heat of sustained firing. The conclusions were sobering but methodical, presented without editorial comment. The American rifle maintains functionality across a wider range of battlefield conditions than our G43, Schultz had written. The en-bloc clip system, while producing an audible signature when the last round is fired and the clip is ejected, provides faster reloading than any magazine or stripper clip system we have tested. The rifle's gas system requires less frequent maintenance than our G43 to maintain reliability. Most significantly, the M1 Garand has been issued to the entirety of American rifle infantry, not as a specialized weapon, but as the standard shoulder arm. This represents a fundamental advantage in squad-level firepower that our current infantry doctrine does not adequately address. Volkmann knew that Schultz's technical assessment would be compiled with dozens of similar reports and forwarded up through Wehrmacht channels, eventually reaching the desks of senior officers who would have to decide whether Germany could develop an effective response. But he also knew, with a fatalist's clarity, that no such response was possible. Even if German designers could immediately create a rifle superior to the Garand and the G43, had already proven that such a weapon was within German technical capabilities, there was no possibility of producing it in sufficient quantities to re-equip the millions of men serving in infantry units across multiple fronts. The factories at Oberndorf, at Suhl, at Berlin-Borsigwalde were already running at maximum capacity, producing Kar98k, rifles, machine guns, ammunition, and the countless other items required to sustain armies fighting from the Atlantic coast to the depths of Russia. Converting those factories to produce a new rifle design would require months of retooling, enormous investments of scarce resources, and would temporarily halt production of the weapons that German soldiers currently carried. The Americans had made their decision to adopt the M1 Garand in peacetime in 1936, 8 years before American ground forces would engage German troops in any significant numbers. They had spent those years perfecting the manufacturing process, training their workers, building the production capacity, and issuing the rifles to their peacetime army, so that when war came, the M1 Garand was already the standard weapon, the rifle that every American soldier trained with from his first days in uniform. By 1944, an entire generation of American infantrymen had never fired a bolt-action rifle, except perhaps for basic marksmanship training. The semi-automatic Garand was, to them, what a rifle was supposed to be. This represented not just a technological advantage, but a profound difference in institutional preparation and industrial foresight. Volkmann picked up one of the en-bloc clips from the bench, examining its simple construction. 8 rounds of ammunition held together by a spring steel frame, the entire assembly weighing just a few ounces. A German soldier carrying 90 rounds of ammunition, 18 clips for the Kar98k, would have those rounds divided among multiple stripper clips, each holding 5 rounds, requiring 18 separate loading actions to expend all his ammunition. An American soldier carrying 96 rounds, 12 en-bloc clips for the Garand, could reload 12 times, each reload taking a fraction of the time required for the German stripper clip loading process. Over the course of a firefight lasting minutes or hours, these seconds accumulated into a significant tactical advantage. The distinctive ping of the ejecting clip, which occurred when the Garand fired its 8th and final round, had become a subject of discussion among German officers who had read after-action reports from the Italian and Western fronts. Some reports suggested that experienced German soldiers had learned to listen for this sound, recognizing it as a signal that an American rifleman's weapon was momentarily empty, providing a brief opportunity to return fire or advance. But Volkmann was skeptical of this supposed tactical advantage. Even if a German soldier heard the clip ejection difficult in the chaos and noise of combat, and even if he correctly identified the specific American soldier whose rifle had just emptied nearly impossible when facing a dispersed squad, and even if he managed to take advantage of the 2-second window before that American inserted a fresh clip, he would still be facing 7 other American riflemen whose Garands remained loaded and ready. The ping, in Volkmann's assessment, was a minor tactical signature that did nothing to diminish the fundamental firepower advantage the M1 Garand provided. He had spent enough time examining the rifle. The specifications were clear, the advantages undeniable, the implications straightforward. German infantry, armed with excellent but outdated bolt-action rifles, faced American infantry armed with semi-automatic weapons that had been designed, tested, and mass-produced with the kind of industrial thoroughness that characterized American approaches to military production. It wasn't that German engineers couldn't design a competitive weapon, the G43 proved they could. It was that German industry, operating under the constraints of a shrinking resource base, strategic bombing, and the demands of maintaining armies across multiple fronts, couldn't produce such a weapon in sufficient quantities to matter. Volkmann drafted his report that evening, sitting at his desk in the officers' quarters at Kummersdorf. He chose his words carefully, knowing that his assessment would be read by men who would be looking for any hint of defeatism or insufficient faith in German capabilities. But his professional obligation, as he understood it, was to provide an accurate technical evaluation, regardless of how unwelcome his conclusions might be. The M1 Garand rifle represents a significant tactical advantage for American infantry forces, he wrote. The weapon's semi-automatic action and 8-round capacity provide approximately 2 to 3 times the practical rate of fire compared to our Kar98k's. This advantage is compounded by the superior reload speed of the en-bloc clip system. While our Gewehr 43 provides comparable capabilities, it is not issued in sufficient numbers to significantly affect the overall firepower balance. The captured rifle demonstrates robust construction and reliable function. American industrial capacity has permitted the production of this weapon on a scale that equips their entire rifle infantry. No comparable program is feasible for our forces given current production constraints and strategic priorities. He paused, considering whether to add a final observation, then decided that completeness required it. Enemy prisoners expressed genuine surprise that German infantry retain bolt-action rifles. This indicates that American forces consider semi-automatic rifles to be the expected standard of modern infantry equipment. The psychological impact of this disparity on German troops, particularly when engaged in defensive operations against numerically superior and better equipped American units, should not be discounted. Volkmann's report joined hundreds of similar documents flowing through Wehrmacht intelligence channels in the winter and spring of 1944. But the most revealing accounts came not from testing facilities or ordnance offices, but from the soldiers who faced American infantry fire on the battlefields of Italy, France, and later Germany itself. These after-action reports, preserved in military archives, painted a consistent picture of combat encounters where German infantry found themselves outgunned by an enemy whose standard rifle provided capabilities that German doctrine had reserved for specialized weapons. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Oberleutnant Karl Wegener commanded a rifle company in the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division, defending positions south of the town of Cisterna during the Allied breakout from the Anzio beachhead in May 1944. His company, numbering roughly 120 men at the start of the battle, occupied a series of fortified farmhouses and stone walls that provided excellent defensive positions overlooking the approaches from the American lines. Wegener's men were experienced soldiers, many of them veterans of the Eastern Front, familiar with defensive operations and confident in their ability to exact heavy casualties on attacking infantry. They carried the standard weapons of a German rifle company, Kar98k rifles, several MG-42 machine guns positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire, a handful of Panzerfausts for anti-tank defense, and the usual complement of stick grenades and pistols. The American attack, when it came on the morning of May 23rd, began with an artillery bombardment that lasted 20 minutes, heavy enough to force Wegener's men into their covered positions, but not concentrated enough to destroy the defensive works. When the shelling lifted, Wegener's forward observers reported American infantry emerging from tree lines roughly 400 meters to the south, advancing in dispersed formations across open farmland. Wegener ordered his machine gunners to open fire at 300 meters, the range at which the MG-42's accuracy and rate of fire would be most effective. The machine gun fire should have stopped the attack, or at least forced the Americans to seek cover and consolidate before attempting another advance. Instead, what Wegener witnessed from his observation post surprised him. The American infantry continued advancing, not in a headlong charge, but in a methodical fire and maneuver tactic, where some soldiers provided covering fire while others moved forward in short rushes. The volume of rifle fire coming from the American lines was what struck Wegener most immediately. He had expected to hear the slower, more deliberate crack of bolt-action rifles, similar to the sound of his own men's Kar98k rifles. Instead, the incoming fire was continuous, almost like additional machine guns, though Wegener could clearly identify the American M1919 machine guns by their heavier, sustained bursts. The rifle, fire semi-automatic, rapid, sustained, created an almost constant sound that made it difficult for his men to identify safe moments to expose themselves to return fire. German soldiers, trained to fire aimed shots and work their bolt actions between rounds, found themselves pinned by an enemy whose riflemen could maintain fire during their squad's movement, providing suppression without relying solely on machine guns or supporting weapons. Wegener later estimated that the firefight lasted approximately 45 minutes before American forces had closed to within 100 meters of his positions. During that time, his company expended thousands of rounds of ammunition but inflicted relatively light casualties on the attacking Americans, who used terrain features and the suppressive effect of their rifle fire to minimize exposure during their advance. When American infantry finally assaulted his forward positions, Wegener's men found themselves in close-range firefights, where the Garand's advantages became overwhelming. An American rifleman could deliver 8 aimed shots as rapidly as he could squeeze the trigger, reload in 2 seconds, and continue firing. A German rifleman had to work his bolt between each shot, a movement that required repositioning the rifle and temporarily losing his sight picture, and then reload 5 rounds individually when his magazine ran empty. The battle ended when American tanks, having worked their way around Wegener's flanks, began firing directly into his positions from the rear. Wegener ordered a withdrawal, executing a fighting retreat that cost him another 15 men before his company reached secondary positions held by battalion reserves. Of his original 120 men, he had lost 38 killed or seriously wounded, and another dozen missing or captured. American casualties, by his best estimate based on what he had observed, were perhaps half that number. He attributed the disparity not to any failure of courage or tactical skill on his men's part, but to the fundamental firepower imbalance between a rifle company armed with bolt-action weapons and one equipped with semi-automatic rifles. His after-action report, filed on May 25th, was brutally frank. The enemy's standard rifle provides him with firepower previously associated with specialized automatic weapons. Our infantry, armed with bolt-action rifles, cannot match this volume of fire. The tactical implications are severe. In defensive operations, the enemy can suppress our positions with rifle fire alone, allowing his infantry to close without requiring machine gun support. In offensive operations, our men cannot provide adequate covering fire for squad maneuvers. Request immediate issuance of semi-automatic rifles or reassessment of infantry tactics to compensate for firepower deficit. Wegener's report was not unique. Similar accounts appeared in Wehrmacht records from units engaged with American forces in Normandy following the June 6th invasion. German defenders, dug into the hedgerow country of the Cotentin Peninsula, discovered that the defensive advantages of that terrain, thick vegetation, sunken roads, fields divided by ancient earthen banks, were partially negated by American infantry tactics that relied on overwhelming short-range firepower. A German squad occupying a hedgerow position, with excellent fields of fire across an adjacent field, found that American squads could advance to the opposite hedgerow and then deliver such intense rifle fire that the German defenders could not expose themselves to aim and shoot without immediate suppression. Unteroffizier Hans Schmidt, a squad leader in the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, described an engagement near the town of Saint-Lô in July 1944, where his squad of 10 men, armed with 9 Kar98k rifles and 1 MG-42 machine gun, engaged an American squad attempting to cross a field to reach his position. The American squad, numbering roughly 12 men based on Schmidt's count, reached the opposite hedgerow and immediately opened fire with such volume that Schmidt's machine gunner was forced to take cover after firing only a brief burst. The sound was like tearing cloth. Schmidt wrote in a letter home that was later captured and translated by Allied intelligence, continuous ripping of rifle fire that didn't stop. We couldn't raise our heads to shoot without bullets hitting the dirt around us. When we tried to return fire, their machine guns would join in. It felt like facing twice our number. Schmidt's tactical assessment, written from the perspective of a junior non-commissioned officer rather than a staff officer, captured the ground-level reality of facing American infantry. Their riflemen shoot like our machine gunners, every one of them. They don't stop to reload as often. When they do reload, it takes them no time. Meanwhile, we're working our bolts after every shot, losing sight of targets. And when we need to reload, we're putting in rounds one at a time. By the time a German soldier has fired 5 shots and reloaded, an American has fired 16 shots and reloaded once. This is not an exaggeration. I have counted. The mathematics that Major Volkmann had calculated at the Kummersdorf testing facility translated into tactical realities that German infantry encountered daily once large-scale combat with American forces began. The M1 Garand's 8-round capacity meant that in the time required for a German soldier to fire 5 rounds and reload, an American soldier could fire 8 rounds, reload, and fire 8 more, a 16-5 advantage in rounds delivered downrange. Even accounting for the American soldier taking slightly more time to aim between shots due to the semi-automatic action's muzzle rise, the practical rate of fire remained at least 2-1 in favor of the Garand. Multiplied across a 10-man squad, this translated into the firepower equivalent of a 20-man German squad, assuming equal marksmanship and tactical competence. German tactical doctrine, developed over decades of military experience and refined through the campaigns of the First World War and the early victories of the Second World War had been built around the squad machine gun as the primary source of firepower. A German infantry squad, typically 10 men, was organized around the MG-34 or MG-42 machine gun, with riflemen serving primarily to protect the machine gun, carry ammunition for it, and provide auxiliary fire when needed. The machine gun was the killing weapon. The rifles were support weapons. This doctrine worked effectively when all sides employed similar infantry weapons. But when facing American squads where every rifleman carried what amounted to a light automatic weapon, the German doctrine revealed its vulnerability. If American rifle fire could suppress the German machine gun position, the rest of the German squad was reduced to bolt-action rifles facing semi-automatic weapons, a mismatch that no amount of tactical skill could fully compensate for. Some German units attempted to adapt by concentrating their own firepower more effectively. Reports from the autumn of 1944 describe German squad leaders being instructed to have their riflemen fire in volleys, creating brief moments of concentrated fire that might force American infantry to take cover. But this tactic required precise timing and coordination that was difficult to maintain in actual combat conditions, and it still didn't address the fundamental problem. Once the volley was fired, German soldiers had to work their bolt actions and reload, during which time American riflemen could continue delivering sustained fire. The arrival of the G43 semi-automatic rifle in limited numbers provided some German units with weapons that could match the Garand's capabilities, but the quantities were never sufficient to significantly alter the firepower balance. A typical German infantry company in late 1944 might have a handful of G43 rifles distributed among its platoons, usually issued to squad leaders or designated marksmen. These weapons helped, but they were drops in an ocean. The vast majority of German infantrymen continued to carry the Kar98k throughout the war, not because German high command was unaware of the rifle's limitations compared to the M1 Garand, but because there was simply no alternative. German industry, by 1944, was struggling to maintain production of existing weapons while replacing losses and equipping new units. Retooling factories to produce millions of semi-automatic rifles was logistically impossible. The captured Garands that found their way to German testing facilities and occasionally to frontline units became objects of both professional interest and a certain bitter admiration among German soldiers and officers who understood their significance. Hauptmann Friedrich Bauer, an ordnance officer attached to the 7th Army defending Alsace in late 1944, wrote in his diary about examining a captured M1 Garand brought to him by a patrol that had ambushed an American supply convoy. The rifle is well made, robust, clearly designed for mass production, but without sacrificing quality, he noted. The action is smooth, the sights are practical, the weight is reasonable. It is not elegant in the way our Mauser is elegant, but it is thoroughly modern in a way that our rifle is not. The Americans have understood something that we failed to grasp in time, that in infantry combat, volume of fire matters more than perfection of individual shots. Bauer's observation touched on a fundamental difference in military philosophy between German and American approaches to infantry weapons. The Kar98k represented a culmination of bolt-action rifle design, a weapon that could deliver exceptional accuracy in the hands of a trained marksman, built with the precision engineering that German manufacturers prided themselves on. German military doctrine, inherited from the late 19th century and reinforced by First World War experience, emphasized accurate rifle fire at ranges of 300 to 500 meters. German soldiers trained extensively in marksmanship, and the Kar98k was capable of hitting targets at distances that exceeded most practical combat ranges. The American approach, embodied in the M1 Garand, accepted slightly less theoretical accuracy in exchange for dramatically higher practical firepower. The Garand was accurate enough for combat purposes, fully capable of hitting man-sized targets at normal engagement ranges, but its real advantage came from its ability to put many rounds downrange quickly, providing the suppressive fire that allowed infantry squads to maneuver and close with the enemy. American tactical doctrine, particularly as it evolved during the Second World War, emphasized fire and movement, with rifle squads providing their own covering fire rather than relying entirely on machine guns. The M1 Garand was designed explicitly for this doctrine, a weapon that gave every American rifleman the ability to contribute substantial firepower to his squad's combat effectiveness. By the winter of 1944–45, as German forces fell back toward the Rhine and then across it, the accounts from frontline units revealed a grim acceptance of the firepower disparity. A report from a Volksgrenadier division, one of the hastily formed infantry divisions created in the latter part of the war from various replacement and training units, described an engagement near the Siegfried Line where a German platoon, occupying prepared defensive positions, was overwhelmed by an American company despite inflicting initial casualties on the attackers. The enemy advanced in bounds, one element firing while the other moved, the report stated. Our men could not raise their heads during the enemy's firing phases. When we attempted to fire during their movement phases, they immediately went to ground, and their firing element intensified its volume. We estimate that the enemy rifle fire was 3 to 4 times the volume of our own. This disparity proved decisive. The report continued with a recommendation that read almost like an admission of defeat. Given the enemy's advantage in individual weapons, defensive positions must be more strongly fortified and machine gun emplacements better protected. Riflemen alone cannot contest enemy advances when outgunned by this margin. Request additional machine guns and automatic weapons to compensate for rifle deficit. But additional machine guns were precisely what German industry could not provide in sufficient quantities. The MG-42, arguably the best machine gun of the Second World War, was a complex weapon requiring skilled manufacturing and high-quality materials. German factories produced them by the hundreds of thousands, a remarkable achievement given the strategic bombing campaign and resource shortages, but never enough to equip every squad with multiple machine guns or to compensate for the fundamental inferiority of bolt-action rifles facing semi-automatic weapons. Perhaps the most revealing assessment came not from a military report, but from interrogations of German prisoners captured in the final months of the war. Allied intelligence officers, conducting systematic interviews with captured German soldiers, frequently asked about their experiences facing American infantry. A consistent theme emerged from these interrogations. German soldiers respected American artillery, feared American air power, but were most immediately impressed and demoralized by American infantry firepower. One captured Obergefreiter, a veteran of both the Eastern and Western fronts, told his interrogators, "Fighting the Russians was terrible because there were so many of them, and they didn't care about casualties. Fighting the Americans was terrible because they shot so much. Every American soldier shoots like he has unlimited ammunition. Their rifle never stops. You can't fight against that with 5 bullets and a bolt. The 8 rounds of the M1 Garand versus the 5 rounds of the Kar98k 3 additional cartridges that, when multiplied across millions of infantrymen and billions of rounds of combat, represented one of the quiet but decisive advantages that shaped the ground war in Western Europe. It wasn't the advantage that won the war. No single weapon system ever determines the outcome of conflicts fought on the scale of the Second World War. American numerical superiority, overwhelming material advantages in artillery and armor, complete dominance of the air, and the enormous logistical capacity that kept their armies supplied in the field, all of these mattered more than individual infantry weapons. But within the context of small unit infantry combat, in the firefights and close engagements that characterized so much of the ground fighting, the Garand gave American infantry a consistent tactical edge that German soldiers recognized and German officers acknowledged in their reports. Major Volkmann, still serving at the Wehrmacht testing facilities as the war moved into its final year, continued to receive and evaluate captured American equipment throughout 1945. By then, the M1 Garand was no longer a novelty, but a familiar sight, with dozens of examples having passed through German testing programs. Each one told the same story: solid construction, reliable function, practical design, optimized for mass production and battlefield effectiveness. In his final report, written in March 1945, as Allied armies crossed the Rhine and the Third Reich entered its death throes, Volkmann allowed himself a moment of professional reflection that transcended the immediate military crisis. The M1 Garand rifle, he wrote, represents a weapon development philosophy that prioritized practical battlefield effectiveness over theoretical perfection. The Americans sacrificed marginal accuracy and elegant engineering for the decisive advantages of firepower and production efficiency. This reflects a pragmatic approach to military technology that has characterized their entire war effort. We designed weapons that our peacetime industry could produce with precision craftsmanship. They designed weapons that their wartime industry could produce by the millions. The result is that their soldiers carry rifles that, while perhaps not superior to ours in every measurable specification, provide them with capabilities that our soldiers cannot match with the weapons we have given them. This is not a failure of German engineering. It is a recognition that industrial capacity and design philosophy are as important to BIA military success as technical excellence. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.